Survivors Speak, 3 Chilling True Cruise Ship Horror Stories. Welcome to DTC, the Place of the Brave, where we dive into the depths of the most chilling true stories that will leave you questioning the safety of your next voyage. In this video, we explore 3 bone-chilling cruise ship horror stories that are all too real. From mysterious disappearances to terrifying encounters at sea, these stories will make you rethink your idea of a relaxing getaway. Hold on tight as we uncover the sinister side of cruising that you won't find in any brochure. Get ready for a journey into the unknown, where fear knows no boundaries. Story 1, Bone-Chilling True Cruise Ship Horror Story. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's episode. Tonight, we'll be diving into real-life chilling tales from the high seas, stories from the heart of the ocean, where isolation and unexpected encounters leave lasting scars on the minds of those who experience them. But before we begin, if you're enjoying the content, please give us a like. And if you have any horrifying or unsettling experiences of your own, don't hesitate to share them with us. Who knows? Your story might just make it into one of our upcoming episodes. It's hard to shake off the eerie feeling I get whenever I think back to that time. 15 years ago, I was 20, fresh out of high school, and desperately trying to make something of myself. I landed a job on a cargo ship, no luxury cruise liner, no 5-star accommodations, just a rusting, weathered ship that had been around for decades. It wasn't glamorous by any means, but the pay was decent, and it gave me a chance to see the world. The crew, though, was a different story. These were men who had lived and worked together for years, their bonds forged in the grueling, isolated life of sailors. I felt like an outsider, a kid who didn't know the ropes, trying to fit into a tight-knit group where trust and familiarity were everything. The ship I was on had been in service for over 30 years, and while that might not sound ancient, when you're living and working on a vessel like that, it feels like the ship has its own soul, one that carries the memories of decades of voyages. The crew, too, had their stories, and they didn't waste any time sharing them with me. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices tinged with both fear and fascination, about the ghosts that haunted the ship. They'd ask me if I believed in ghosts, to which I always answered no, though deep down I wasn't so sure. I'd had my own strange encounters with the supernatural, but I didn't want to admit it, especially not to a crew full of hardened sailors. Then it happened. One night, about a week after I boarded the ship, I was in my small, cramped cabin, trying to get some sleep after a long shift. It was around 1 a.m. when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of 3 sharp knocks on my door. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I opened the door quickly, expecting to find one of the crew members standing there, probably playing a prank on the new guy. But there was no one. The hallway was completely empty. I chalked it up to a joke. Maybe one of the guys was hiding, waiting for me to look foolish. But it wasn't a one-time thing. Over the next few days, it happened again and again, always at the same time, always 3 knocks. Each time I'd rush to open the door, only to find the hallway deserted. At first I thought it was just my imagination, but after a while I wasn't so sure. The ship felt different. There was a heaviness in the air that I couldn't quite explain. I'd worked on other ships before, but none of them had felt like this. On the other ships, the crew was like family. Everyone got along. But here, it was like there was an unspoken tension, an undercurrent of unease that nobody talked about. Every time I walked through the halls, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. I started noticing strange things. The lights would flicker, sometimes going completely dark for a few seconds. The radios would emit static for no reason at all, or I'd hear a voice whispering through the speakers when no one was on the line. It was the kind of unsettling phenomenon that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, as I was walking through the laundry room at around 2 a.m., The ship's alarm blared suddenly, sending a rush of panic through me. I spun around to find the door to the watertight compartment slamming shut. I rushed over to see what was going on, but as soon as I reached the door, it stopped moving. The handle was cold as I grabbed it, trying to turn it, but it wouldn't budge. I called out over the intercom to the bridge, asking if they'd close the door, but they had no idea what I was talking about. They hadn't activated the door. A chill ran down my spine. I forced the door open, only to hear it creak back into place behind me, locking itself. I had to fight to get it open again, but every time I did, it started to close on its own. I felt trapped. No, worse than trapped. It was like something was preventing me from leaving that room. I could feel it, like a presence lingering in the shadows, just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. It wasn't just me, though. I started hearing strange whispers in the hallways at night. Sometimes I'd find objects moved in my room, as though someone had been inside. One time I came back to my cabin to find the bed perfectly made, even though I never touched it. No one else had been in my room. I checked with the crew. No one had been in there, but it was as if the room itself was somehow alive. And then the knocking began again, but this time it wasn't just at my door. The other sailors began to hear it too, always in different rooms at different times, but the same 3 knocks. We began to talk about it, but no one could explain it. Some of the older crew members whispered about the ghost of a sailor who had died on the ship decades ago. He had been found floating in the ocean, his body battered and broken after a violent storm. They said his spirit never left the ship. I started to wonder if the crew's stories were true. The fear was spreading throughout the ship like a disease. People began to avoid certain areas, especially the old storage rooms in the bowels of the ship. Some nights I'd hear footsteps in the hallways when no one else was around. The air would turn cold and I'd feel a strange, suffocating pressure in my chest. It was as if the ship itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then came the worst night of all. I was on a midnight shift, alone in the engine room, when I felt something brush past me. I spun around, expecting to see one of the crew members, but there was nothing. Just the sound of the engine hum and the faint creaking of the ship's old bones. But as I turned back to my work, I saw it, a shadow moving in the corner of my eye. It was tall, dark, and featureless, but it was unmistakable. I froze, unable to move as the shadow seemed to grow, reaching out for me. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. The air felt thick, like I was suffocating. The shadow moved closer, and I heard a voice, whispering my name, calling me in a language I didn't understand. That's when I knew I was not alone. When I left the ship for good a few weeks later, I could still hear the knocking in my mind, still feel that heavy presence watching me from the shadows. I don't know what's still haunting that ship, but I know one thing for sure: whatever it isn't finished. And so, if you ever find yourself on a ship out there in the middle of the ocean, alone with nothing but the sound of the waves and the creaking of the hull, be wary. Keep an eye on the shadows, listen carefully for the knockings in the night, and whatever you do, don't open the door. You never know who or what might be waiting on the other side. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 2, Bone-Chilling True Cruise Ship. Horror story, The Phantom Crewman. Imagine this. It's a dark, quiet night at sea, the kind where the silence feels suffocating. No sound except for the faint lapping of waves against the hull of the ship and the distant hum of the engines beneath your feet. This happened to me over a year ago during my time as the second officer aboard a large cargo ship, the kind that takes weeks at a time to traverse across vast open seas. And trust me, the only thing more unsettling than the silence of the ocean is being alone with your thoughts in the dead of night. It was a routine night shift around 1:30 a.m. The ship was cruising across the Atlantic, far away from land. I was walking the deck just to get some fresh air and stretch my legs. The cold air felt good against my skin. It cut through the thick layers of my uniform, but that chill only made the silence feel even more intense. No one else was around. The night crew was asleep, and the few who were on duty had disappeared into their posts, leaving me alone in the dark, vast expanse of the ship. But then something caught my eye. I was walking past the stern of the ship, glancing around the deck, when I noticed a figure on the starboard side, standing still against the railing, facing the ocean. At first, I thought it was just another crew member out for a late-night stroll. It's not uncommon for people to get some air, especially on such long, monotonous trips. But then it struck me, 1:30 in the morning? That's not the usual time for anyone to be outside. The rest of the crew was supposed to be off duty. I brushed it off as nothing, thinking it might be some late-night wanderer, but then I walked around the deck and caught a glimpse of the man again. This time he was standing in the middle of cargo hold number 1, right next to the windscreen facing away from me. Something about the way he stood there, motionless, sent an uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. I stopped dead in my tracks. There was something wrong. The air grew heavier, and a cold sweat began to form on the back of my neck. I stared at him for a moment, trying to figure out what was so odd. I couldn't see his face, but everything else seemed out of place. The man was wearing a white jumpsuit. A white jumpsuit? That's not the uniform the crew wears. We all wear red coveralls with reflective silver stripes on the shoulders, a standard uniform for safety and visibility. But this man was dressed in all white, a color no one on the ship wore, and his helmet was bright orange, completely out of place. The rest of us wore white helmets. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't help it. Something wasn't right. I stepped forward, trying to call out to him, but my voice felt swallowed by the emptiness. I reached for the radio and tried to make contact with him. No response. That's when I felt my blood run cold. I turned on the deck lights, hitting the switch by the control panel. The floodlights illuminated the deck in a harsh, sterile light. I looked up, expecting the man to still be standing there, but he was gone. Gone. Just like that. I couldn't understand it. 1 second he was there, standing still, and the next, nothing. It was as though he had melted into the shadows. I thought maybe I was just seeing things, a trick of the light. Exhaustion had been creeping up on me, and the isolation was starting to get to me. But when I went below deck and asked the other crew members, no one knew who I was talking about. No one had been out on the deck, and no one wore white coveralls or orange helmets. They all looked at me like I was crazy. I tried to push it out of my mind, but that night, I couldn't shake the feeling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the man standing there, his face hidden in the shadows, his body motionless, waiting. And the worst part? He never spoke. He only raised his hand and waved at me. A slow, deliberate wave. For days, I couldn't escape that feeling. And it wasn't just me. Other crew members started acting differently. They were jumpy, whispering to each other in corners, exchanging uneasy glances. They said they'd seen strange things too. A shadow in the corner of their eyes, figures moving in the dark corners of the ship. But when they went to investigate, there was nothing. They dismissed it as nothing more than the stress of the job or lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was on this ship. The worst part came a week later. I was doing my rounds again, walking the deck alone, when I saw him again. The same man. But this time, he wasn't alone. Standing next to him was something else, a figure, a shadow. It was massive, towering over him, but I couldn't make out what it was at first. I froze in place, my blood running cold. It had the silhouette of a human, but the edges seemed to blur in a way that made my stomach turn. As I looked closer, I noticed it had no real face, just a smooth, featureless void. And that's when the air grew thick, and the sound of the waves crashing against the hull seemed to vanish. It was as if the world had gone silent, unnaturally silent. I called out to them, but no one responded. Instead, the figure raised its hands slowly, just like before, and waved at me. And then it was gone. Both of them. Gone. I ran below deck and immediately contacted the captain, trying to explain what had happened. But when I told him about the man in the white suit, he just looked at me like I had lost my mind. He said no one was supposed to be out there and that there was no one matching that description on board. Then the ship's radio went dead. No transmissions. No response from any of the other vessels nearby. Just dead silence. The rest of the night passed in a daze, and by the time I woke up in my quarters the next morning, I was covered in strange, deep scratches on my arms. They looked like fingerprints, but they weren't from any human hand. No one else saw them, and when I tried to tell the others, they dismissed it as paranoia. But I knew what had happened. The ship, the crew, and the ocean around us, everything felt wrong. And the worst part? The man never left. The whispers followed me everywhere. The crew? They started to change. Eyes darkened, faces gaunt, and some of them stopped talking altogether. One by one, they started to disappear. I was the only one left who had seen the man, the only one who had witnessed it all. The captain and the officers wouldn't believe me, and when I left the ship for good, I swore to never set foot on the ocean again. But here's the thing, even now, months later, I still hear the whispers. They echo in the back of my mind, and sometimes when I'm alone late at night, I see him again. The man in the white coveralls, standing in the distance, just waiting, watching. And I can't shake the feeling that I'm not the only one who sees him. The question still lingers. Who or what was he? Was he a ghost? A creature from the deep? Or was it all in my mind? The ocean has a way of hiding its secrets, and some things should never be uncovered. Do you dare to listen to the dark? If tonight's tale gave you chills, let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what creeps you out and what other stories you'd love us to explore. Don't miss out on the next terrifying story. Subscribe to DTC, the Place of the Brave, and join the family that thrives on the unknown. Tap the notification bell so you're the first to hear every spine-chilling tale. Share this video with someone brave enough to face the darkness, and let's dive deeper into the creeps that haunt our world. Comment below and become part of the terror. The darkness is calling, and we want you with us. Story 3. He, Man in the Fog, a chilling encounter on the shores of Halifax. It happened just a few hours ago. To this day, I still can't shake the unsettling feeling that something wrong happened. Something I can't fully explain. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia, close to the coast, and while the area is usually peaceful and beautiful, it's also home to some strange occurrences that defy logic. A few days ago, my friend called me with a story that would haunt me for weeks to come. He spoke about a large, old buoy that had mysteriously washed up on the shore. It wasn't in its usual spot. It had drifted much farther from where it normally stays. Now, buoys aren't uncommon, but this one seemed out of place. The current wasn't strong enough to carry something of that size so far from its usual position. The weird thing? No one knew why it was there or how it had gotten there. It wasn't just an oddity, it felt wrong. He asked if I wanted to go with him to take a look and snap some photos. We hadn't seen each other in a while because he didn't really get along with most of my other friends, but that was fine. The end of the school year meant I had a bit of free time, so I agreed. We met up after about 30 minutes, and after a brief catch-up, we started walking. The walk to the shore was about 45 minutes, and as we trudged across the sandy beach, the conversation flowed easily. The scent of salt water hung in the air, mixing with the earthy smell of seaweed scattered along the shore. But something in the air felt different, a slight tension, like the world was holding its breath. We didn't think much of it at the time. We were too busy chatting, too distracted by the thought of finding the buoy and snapping some cool photos to notice anything else. But when we reached the top of a small hill to get a better view, everything changed. The weather shifted suddenly. A thick, dense fog began to roll in from the sea, and dark clouds gathered in the sky, blotting out the sunlight. It felt like a storm was about to break, but it didn't, at least not in the traditional sense. The fog felt unnatural, heavier than any mist I had ever seen before. It didn't just obscure the landscape, it felt like it was cloaking the area, as though it were trying to hide something. At that point, we didn't think much of it. We were still focused on finding the buoy, but then something else happened. My friend's phone suddenly went haywire. It froze, rebooted itself, and kept losing signal. He laughed it off, attributing it to the cold. But I didn't buy it. It wasn't that cold, not cold enough to cause something like that. And it wasn't just his phone, there was something else about the air, something unsettling. We looked around, but we couldn't spot the buoy anywhere. We had been so sure it was close by, but now it seemed to have vanished. As we stood there trying to make sense of it, a sinking feeling washed over me, like we were being watched. It wasn't just a gut feeling, it was an oppressive, weighty sense of being stalked. Something was wrong, and I knew it in my bones. My friend didn't seem to notice, too busy fiddling with his phone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. I turned around quickly and froze. A man was standing at the base of the hill, staring up at us. At first I thought he might be another hiker, or someone looking for the buoy too, but there was something about him that made my heart skip a beat. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring directly at us. I couldn't see his face clearly, but the intensity of his gaze made my skin crawl. I didn't even have time to process the full thought before he started walking toward us. Slowly at first, but then faster, almost too fast for comfort. It was like he was moving too deliberately. His steps were heavy, deliberate, not the kind of casual walk you'd expect from someone who was just out for a stroll. It was as if every step was measured, like he was preparing for something. We froze for a second, unsure of what to do. But then panic kicked in, and my instincts screamed at me to run. I grabbed my friend's arm, pulling him into motion, and we started sprinting away from him. The heavy thudding of my own heartbeat was the only sound I could hear over the wind. My breath came in quick gasps as I glanced over my shoulder, terrified that the man was right behind us. But when I looked, I couldn't see him, not directly. Instead, I saw him moving along the fence line that bordered the area. He was walking fast, but not in the same direction we were running. He wasn't following us directly. He was circling around like he was trying to trap us. That thought sent an icy shiver down my spine. I could barely catch my breath, and my legs felt like lead, but we pushed on. We didn't stop running until we reached a clearing near the main road. When we finally stopped, gasping for air, I thought it was over. But something told me it wasn't. Something about that man, the way he moved, the way he didn't react when we screamed or tried to get his attention, it wasn't normal. We pulled out our phones and tried to call the police, but the connection was spotty, just like my friend's phone earlier. Eventually, we got through, and they promised to send someone out. But when the officers arrived, they said they couldn't find anyone. They searched the area, but the man was gone. It didn't make sense. He couldn't have just vanished. Not like that. The officers told us it was probably just a misunderstanding, that we were likely just spooked by the weird weather. But I knew what I saw. I felt it. That man, whoever he was wasn't just some stranger. There was something wrong about him. And the worst part? I know this sounds crazy, but I'm almost certain I saw something in his eyes that I can't forget. It wasn't just a look of confusion or curiosity. It was cold, empty. As the days passed, I tried to forget about what happened, but every time I close my eyes, I can still see his face in my mind's eye, those eyes that seem to burn with an unsettling intensity. And then I started hearing things, whispers. I thought it was just my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, watched. Sometimes when I'm walking near the shore, I catch a glimpse of something in the distance, a shadow that shouldn't be there, or a shape that doesn't quite make sense in the fog. And the buoy? No one has found it since. It disappeared, just like that man. Now I wonder if there's something more to it. Something darker. Maybe that buoy was never meant to be found. Maybe it was just the beginning of something that I'm not ready to understand. Because I can't shake the feeling that whatever happened that day, I've only scratched the surface. This wasn't just a freak occurrence. Something's out there, lurking in the fog. And I'm not sure I'll ever feel safe again. As the darkness deepens and the stories grow more unsettling, we venture deeper into the unknown together. Each chilling tale brings us closer to the eerie truths lurking just beyond the veil of reality. The terror doesn't stop here, it only gets worse. Subscribe to DTC, The Place of the Brave now, and stay on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss what's lurking in the shadows next. Hit that notification bell and prepare for the next terrifying chapter. Remember, in the world of DTC, the place of the brave are always waiting, and they never rest. Good luck sleeping tonight.